there as well. Right, the next speaker, known as the Fuzz. He has a passion for natural farming, DEFRA and mad cow disease. He is about to do a presentation on the individual and the state. Big round of applause for Malcolm Massey, please.
So mine's all about read the small print, the relationship between us and the state. So, relationships. Obviously, we have experienced relationships on a day-to-day basis, not just with the state, but with people that we are friends with, lovers, that sort of thing, right? But primarily, every single human being, every single man and woman on this planet is equal, right? And that's all in the Constitution, and I'll be showing that in a minute. So primarily, the way we organize our relationships is obviously through agreement, because if we're all equal, then we all have to agree on some sort of basis where your limitation of your rights ends and my rights begin, right? So agreements are basically contracts. They can be verbal, they can be written, they can be a tacit agreement like a nod, or they could be a silence, in fact, which is a problem that we're having at the moment because so many of us are silent at the moment. We're quiet, we're too quiet, and that's given the presumption of consent, right? And so that's a big problem because the people that we're here to talk about, the people that we're trying to expose, are just presuming that we're happy with this. And until we actually do a physical action to show our discontent with something, it's just considered that we consent. So consent can be implied or expressed. It's the same thing. Expressed would be something actually like me saying, yes, I consent, whereas implied would be the same thing as tacit. Okay, registration, and this is where we're going to slightly disagree, Barley, so I apologize for this. Not too much, though. Okay, so a contract has to have terms and conditions. It has to, otherwise what are you agreeing to, right? And there's bound to be some sort of product, a service, or in the case of registering your car, you're basically registering just to pay tax, right? It has obligations or duties, because that is basically how an agreement works, right? You're going to agree to do this, I'm going to agree to do that. Well, our obligation at the very least is to make sure that we do that, since the rule of common law is do everything you say you will do. Again, another problem that we're kind of struggling with in society at the moment. And that consent, of course, can be clicking a button or signing forms, or in any way, shape, or form. And it's mostly done that online in a registration. If you go on Facebook and you're going to, I don't know why you'd want to, but if you did, you go on there and you register. You'd click a button. That's an implication. That's an implied consent. Okay, so basically, when we're doing this, we're relinquishing control and limiting our rights. We're not, as far as I'm concerned, and as what I'm going to present to you as my evidence, right? We're not creating ownership. We're not transferring ownership. We're talking about control. It's under contract that these people are basically tricking us to relinquishing our rights. And I'll give you a quick example as to why it's not ownership. 5 years ago, I deregistered from HMRC. I refused to pay tax anymore because I just won't pay to a corrupt system, right? And I'm not... Thanks. I'm not anti-government. I actually think we need a government, right? But we need the government as a service, and it works for us, not the other way around, right? So what I did was I literally phoned up HMRC, and I said, I want to deregister. And she said, that's fine. And I went, oh, that was easy. So she deregistered, a few clicks of the button, and I said, can you send that through as some sort of written confirmation? She did, and I had that. So 2 years later, the Inland Revenue wrote to me and said, hey, you haven't paid tax, you haven't claimed benefit, we don't know what's going on here. So I wrote back to them and said, I'm not registered to pay tax with you guys. And they wrote back saying, oh yeah, but it's a legal obligation. And I wrote back the same letter saying, literally one sentence, I'm not registered to deal with you guys. And that was it. And I haven't heard from Inland Revenue or anyone in, 4 years, right? And they know where I live, it's not as if they don't, right? So if they owned me, right, through registration, then how was I able to do that? The same with my vehicle, and I'll get to that more later. I deregistered my vehicle. So if they own my vehicle through registration, how come I deregistered it? It's, to me, I just don't think it creates ownership. It creates a control. We're accepting, we're consenting to paying that tax. We're consenting to, whatever it is we're registering to. We're consenting to, say, Flickr owning our photographs by registering, because part of the terms and conditions, part of the contract when we do that, is that whatever we upload belongs to them. Okay, so in that instance, yeah, you do transfer ownership, but that was because it was in the terms and conditions. That's not like, that's not the sort of the creature of registration itself. That's because it was in the terms and conditions, and we should have read it. We should have read the small print, basically. So registration of birth, this is a big one. Everyone freaks out, registration of birth, and, oh, the state's going to own my children. Do you know what? If I had a child, damn right, I'd register it. Of course I would register it, because we're registering to the Constitution, right? And I'm going to show you this in a minute. But very quickly, we're registering the Constitution. It's under contract. It's between the people and the monarch. The monarch, as Barley did say, and I agree, is the prime public servant. That's what she is. She's a public servant, right? And it's Her Majesty that's the real power, and Her Majesty is not the Queen, okay? So the terms and conditions of this contract that we're registering to is the Constitution. And if you haven't read it, if you haven't read the Act of Settlement, the Coronation Oath Act, and all of these things, the Bill of Rights, you have to read them. These are the contracts that you've agreed to abide by. So it's really important that we read these. So the product and service is that the monarch, the main public servant, is going to maintain my spiritual, civil, and property rights. And again, I will show you where that is in the Constitution. Okay, everyone's obligations or duties, including hers, including ours, all of ours, is to abide by the Constitution, because that's the contract that we consented to. I think that's my phone. The consent is basically her oath, which she gave when she was coronated, the Queen's oath, and our allegiance to Her Majesty. Now, Her Majesty is the power that's under contract, that is our power that we have gifted to her, okay, and it's gifted under contract, but it's the power. That's what we're talking about when we talk about Her Majesty, her power, right? But that's not the Queen. The Queen is just the public servant that wields that majesty. So, because it's a contract, because it's an agreement, naturally there has to be a limitation of rights. Because if I was the only person on the planet, there'd be no need for a constitution, there'd be no need for a contract, there'd be no need for any sort of agreement, because I don't have to have a relationship with anyone. But because we're all here, and we've all got our rights, and we've got to figure out, hey, where do your rights end, where my rights begin? So we have to find some sort of agreement with that. And because we're equal, we all have to consent. Okay? So in this instance, it's the people who are relinquishing control for security, basically, the security of our civil, property, and spiritual rights being protected. And the Crown is limiting its rights or its power for the right to rule, because the Crown, or not the Crown, the corporation, but as in the monarch, has a limitation of rights. It's called the Constitution. Okay, so in order to carry out her constitutional duties, or the monarch's constitutional duties, we have a government. But notice it's not called the Queen's government, it's called Her Majesty's government. It's the powers government. It's this whole creature that we have that is that power that we've given under consent. And that's what the government belongs to, and that's what it should be serving. Okay, so we also have the right to serve. But to serve, we must follow the policies and therefore limiting our rights of government. And the reason we have to do that is because the Queen, or the public servant, is operating to protect people in the private's rights, right? And once we sign up to the public, they have to be limited in order that those rights, those civil, property, and spiritual rights, are not infringed, okay? So that's why the public servants have to follow rules and regulations, because they can't be infringing on our rights, okay? Though obviously they are. I'm talking here about the system. I'm not talking about the people that are governing the system, because I'm a big believer that the system's not perfect, but it's not a bad system. The problem is we have bad people running that system, and they're the people that have to change. I'll agree with Barley. You don't burn the court down just because there's a corrupt judge in it. You just oust the corrupt judge and you put a decent judge in there. It's pretty, well, it's not easy, but it's as simple as that. So, of course, the safety of the people is paramount. So the Majesty's government can also limit our constitutional rights, and they do that when we enter the public. And they do it with our consent. We've either signed something like a driving license, or we've agreed to something through registration or somewhere away. But that's where the consent is coming from, and that's how our rights are being limited and ultimately taken away from us. And to do that, she gives us titles, licenses, and permits, and so forth. Okay, so the personas. There's been called many a name, right? Legal fiction, straw man, so forth. I'm going to call it a public persona in this instance because I want you to leave here grasping that it's when we enter the public that the problems then start happening, where our rights become limited. Because the public basically means of or concerning or affecting the people. And remember, the Queen's duty is, or the absolute duty the Queen has is to protect our spiritual, civil, and property rights. They're not defined like as in limited. They are unlimited until my rights meet yours, okay? So anything that affects the people on a whole, right, is the Queen's business, because she has to make sure that whatever that group, entity, or whatever is acting on in the public, she has to make sure that they're not going to encroach on our rights, okay? So to do that, she'll create or the government will create its own policies and so forth. So if we're a public servant, or we are using public property, or we are using public services, or we are registering anything to the state, or we're using licenses or permits or any of these things, right, we are limiting our rights. And we're doing that so that we can protect all the spiritual and civil and property rights under the Constitution. And in the private, of course, we're acting on our own individual interests or the interests of small groups. And that's where the people belong. Notice when we say, that when they address us as the public, okay, what they're talking about is a group of people that have had their rights limited in order to protect the people in the private, okay, who haven't had their rights limited. So there's a difference between people and public. There's a big difference, big difference. And of course, people have inalienable rights, whereas public personas or public people operating in the public only have privileges that are afforded to by government. And that's because in the private, we're all operating on our own liability. Again, as Barley was discussing, we all operate on our own liability in the private, and in the public, we're operating in the public liability. Therefore, we are operating on the Queen's liability, because she is the one ultimately liable for when our rights get violated. So what evidence am I going to bring here? Well, I'm going to bring the 2 birth certificates, because they're, well, one's not even a certificate, one's just a certified copy of an entry. The other one's a certificate. And one is governed by the Crown, and I'm going to show you how in a minute. And one is governed by the Constitution. Therefore, one has inalienable rights, whereas the other one has privileges which are granted to it by the Crown. Sorry, I meant to put monarch actually there, but apologies. So on the left side, we have a given name, and on the right side, we have a granted name, a name that was created by Her Majesty, or by the monarch. And because it was created by her, she gets to set all the rules and regulations for it, because whatever you create is what you own, and if you actually genuinely own it, you get to create the rules for it. So on the right, we have a public, sorry, camera right, on that side, we have the public persona, and on this side, we have a record of a living person. So this is the birth certificate. This is mine. I've taken the details out, obviously, but this is basically the 2 birth certificates that we have, that we get given. You can order the certified copy of the entry for yourself. I'm not aware that it comes automatically after birth. However, the public persona, the certificate of birth, does come to you after birth. So we'll just go quickly through the discrepancies of the two documents. And this, for me, is the most important discrepancy, because what this is showing us is who actually controls this document, okay? And on this side, where we've got the certified copy of an entry, basically what we have there is we have the constitutional shield. So we know whatever's in this document is being governed by the Constitution, right? Because it just has the constitutional shield. Whereas on this side, right, what we can see is we can see the Queen's crest, okay? And because that symbol there is the highest thing on that document, we know that that is the authority, that's the power that both created that document and manipulates that document. That's really important to notice, right? Really important, because it's really clear that these are 2 completely different governing bodies because they have different symbols. However, if you look at the Queen's crest, you see the constitutional shield inside the Queen's crest. But this is operating without her authority because it's above her. So next we have the title, okay? And so on this side we have a certified copy of an entry. So it's not even a certificate. It's not a birth certificate. It's just a copy that's been certified. And there's a declaration at the bottom, which we'll get to from the registrar, just to say that it's a certified copy. It's simply a copy of that register, right? And it's important that we register, right, that side of it, because that way the Constitution can recognize us. If we didn't register to the Constitution, how could the Constitution recognize us in the first place? It couldn't. It wouldn't know who we were. So register is simply a written record. That's all it is. It really, from my experience, I've deregistered practically everything. I'm not saying that registration is a bad thing. I'm not saying that at all. But I don't want my rights limited. Sometimes you might want your rights limited in the instance of maybe swapping security for your rights. Sometimes you might want to do that. But myself, There's nothing, I haven't found a single thing that you can't deregister, okay? And if I'd given away ownership, then I just don't see how I could have deregistered. Just quickly, just to note, the references are different. They have different reference numbers. Okay, here we have, interestingly on here, on the record of birth, we have an NHS number, and that's because I'm physical and I was born into this world. And on this side, we don't. But interestingly, I've put one in because the registrar himself did scribble down my NHS number. But it's outside the box. If we just go back here, you'll notice it's all within a box, okay? And the details that we're interested in are what's in the box, okay? So the fact that the NHS number on this side is in the box and the NHS number on that side is not in the box is actually quite very important. That is simply connecting this fiction with that living person. And it even says that in the declaration, but we'll get that in a second. So here's another little interesting discrepancy between the two documents. On the record of birth side, we have the place of birth, but we also have a place of registration, and they're in different boxes, right? So that tells me that it's quite possible, although it wasn't in my case, but it's quite possible that a baby may be born in one place, in one region, and be registered in another, right? Whereas on the public persona side, we don't have that. It's all in one box. So what that tells us is that fiction is born and created and registered all in the same office. That's what makes it. That's a really good example of why that's a fiction, because it's only ever going to be born or birthed within the registration district that it was registered. Another discrepancy would be that on this side I have a mother and father. On the public persona side, there is no mother and father. That's because legal fictions can't have a mother or father. Here we've got the informant. Now, a lot of people have freaked out before and said, oh, informant, it all sounds a bit dodgy and so forth. So I checked this out and I looked back, and basically when the Registration Act was first passed in the 19th century, a lot of people were having children but not actually taking care of them. They were just leaving them in the streets. And so the informant was simply created because it isn't always the mother and father that registers the child. Again, I think this is more sort of Chinese whisper, internet sort of stuff that's kind of it's just got a little bit out of hand because we're all a little bit paranoid because we can see that basically we're being, I was going to say the word abused, I guess, by a group of people who are quite, well, satanic and pretty diabolical. And so we're all kind of a little bit paranoid about some of the stuff they're using, but I'm really not too concerned about the whole informant thing. This is a bummer because I can't really actually read it because it's so small. So I'll tell you what, I'm just going to read it from here. No, I can't even read it from there. Well, that's a bugger, isn't it? Okay. Okay, so it says, certified to be a true copy of an entry. Okay, it's just a declaration to say that it's not a certificate, it's just a true copy. It's a true copy of whatever your parents registered at the time. And then on this side, interestingly, we have certified that the above particulars have been compiled from an entry. Okay, so this document has been created from that document, which means that that document, or the representation of that individual, that living person, me, is far more powerful than that, right? Because that was created from that. And anything which was created from a thing can't be greater than the thing it was created from, okay? So that is basically telling us that all of this fiction has been derived from me, basically. And it'll be the same for you on your documents. And the declaration at the bottom, again, which is really small and unhelpful, is, okay, caution, okay, so basically it's a declaration of copyright. The thing I wanted to read out was the very bottom, which is actually in bold, so I can actually read it, which is good. It says, warning, a certificate is not evidence of identity. All right? So that's really interesting in itself, because this isn't a certificate, this is a certified copy. That's the certificate, because it says it in the title. It says certificate of birth. This doesn't say certificate of birth. This says a certified copy. Okay? So what it's telling you, right, very sneakily, because it's not on the document it needs to be on, is it's saying that's not identity, which means you can't identify with that. And there's a very, very good reason why. And I'll get to that bit in a minute. So if we just talk quickly about the various aspects of the Constitution which give us our rights, this is the Coronation Oath Act, and I'll just read this out. It's really, really important. In fact, I think this is one of the most strongest and important parts of our Constitution. It says, whereas by the law and ancient usage of the realm, the kings and queens thereof have taken a solemn oath upon the evangelists at their respective coronations to maintain the statute laws and customs of the said realm, and this is the important part, and all the people and the inhabitants thereof in their spiritual and civil rights and properties. That is so powerful because it's telling us that's exactly that's the job of the monarch, that's the job of the queen, right, is to protect those spiritual and civil rights. It's in writing, it's a contract, she has sworn to it, which means she has to abide by it. And the beautiful thing, I think, about what these guys did, 300 odd years ago, was they never defined the rights. Have you noticed, they want to bring us a new Bill of Rights, okay? And they want to define them. Oh, let's have these 28 rights, yeah? Well, great. Now we've just limited our rights by 28 different definitions. Fantastic. Whereas here, we have all our spiritual, civil rights and properties. It's a very loose definition for very good reason. And as I described, because my rights end where yours begin, and so that could be different in different situations. Very powerful. And here, this is some very good stuff as well from the Act of Settlement. So, the actual quote is, "The laws of the kingdom are the birthright of the peoples thereof." Has anyone ever heard that before? Good, because you've got to remember that, right? The laws, which basically means the constitution, the law is contract, right? The contract makes the law, because as I described before, we're all equal, right? So therefore, in order to make a law to describe the relationship of the people in this country, right, we have to create a contract. Right? And that's what the law is the constitution is a contract. So the laws, the constitution of the kingdom are the birthright, okay? So if it's a birthright, it means it's a right that you get given at birth, which means it can't be taken away. Because I don't think the MPs are present when I'm popping out into the world for my mum, right? Those rights are gifted to me, right? I have legs, therefore I have the right to move. I have lungs, therefore I have the right to breathe clean air. I have a stomach, therefore I have the right to eat. All these things are inalienable rights, which basically mean they cannot be taken away, okay? Doesn't matter what these people say, it doesn't matter what contracts they make us sign or so forth, these rights still exist, okay? And it's our responsibility, not the responsibility of politicians or anything like that, it's our responsibility to protect those rights and to strengthen them and to make sure that they don't disappear into the annals of time. That's our duty, because those people in government are certainly not going to do that, even though it's their job. So if we quickly surmise rights, okay, so in the private side, right, when I'm not operating in a way that's going to affect people, when I haven't signed a contract with government, when I'm not using their public property, or when I'm not using, when I'm not using their property, or I'm not using their titles, I'm in the private side, and I have full civil, spiritual, and property rights. Okay, and as I said, that's where my rights meet yours. In the public, I have whatever rights the government permits because I've consented to it. Right? That driving license that you've all got in your wallets, if you pull the card out, on it you'll see a signature. Right? And what that signature is your signature, and that is your consent, your agreement to abide by the Road Traffic Act. Right? That's the consent. Right there is the driving license. We made an application for that, even though really we already had the right to travel. We already had it. But what the government very sneakily did, or let's not say government, let's say what a group of people operating within the government sneakily did is they created a new position, a new title, and that title is called driver, okay? And they created that, which means they make the rules for that because they created it. So then what we do is we come along and we say, hey, I want to be a driver. And they go, yep, no worries. You just got to sign here, here, and here. And then we go, bup, 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 bup. And they go, brilliant, there's your driver license. Cool. Make sure you abide by our statutes and away you go. And that's as simple as it gets, really. So basically, they do that for our consent. And that's generally happens when we're acting as a public servant or we're using government property, which includes registered land, registered buildings, registered titles, permits, and licenses. So duties. Every single one of us in this room right now, right, has the duty to uphold the Constitution. That's it. It's a contract. Therefore, you have the duty to uphold it, to abide by it. Right? We've all agreed to it. And I hold my hand up and say I'm glad to, because I think the Constitution is pretty good. It's, like I said, it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but it's a very good system which basically holds the government, it holds the Queen to account because she's got to look after our rights. And in the public, well, again, they all have the duty to uphold the Constitution. How many people here think they're actually abiding by that? Good stuff. And they also have the duty of whatever the duty government sets, because they're all operating under consent. And again, I'd say that I think public service is fantastic. I think we should all be very grateful to our public servants, or at least to the ones that are actually doing their job, right? So I'm not here to bash government. I'm not here to bash public servants or anything. I'm really pointing the fingers at the bad apples and saying, these guys aren't doing their job, and this is where it says in the Constitution that they have to do that. So I just wanted to give you a quick account because I went through the whole deregistration of the car thing. It was about 5 years ago, so I've got notes. So I'm just going to quickly read off the notes, all right? John Hurst, I don't know if he's still here or whatever, but he helped me out a great deal with this. We had some good fun in the courts with this. What I did was I contacted DVLA. I said, I want to deregister my vehicle. They did the classic, oh, you've got a legal obligation to register it. I sent back another letter saying, great, show me that obligation. They sent back the Road Traffic Act, or whatever the act was, governing the registration. And then I wrote back saying, okay, well, where's my obligation to follow that? And we kept doing that for a fair few months, until eventually they got to a point where they'd exhausted all of that, and they had nowhere else to turn, because every time they were showing me something, I was saying, great, well, show me the proof that I've actually got to abide by that. So eventually we got there, and then she just wrote to me and said, look, what did she say? She said, we note your comments. It was just a literally very simple letter. So I was like, okay, that's cool. So off I went. I made a classic mistake, because like I say, 5 years ago, I was a bit green, I was a bit naive. I thought I could get through all of this while still having a driving license, right? And I'm not saying in theory that that's not correct, right? But in practice, it makes things a hell of a lot more complicated. However, when I got pulled over, I did tell the police officer, again, I hold my hand up here, I shouldn't have done this, but I told him, I said, I don't have a license. I also said, which was the truth, I don't have insurance, I don't have an MOT, I don't have plates on my car. And he said to me, well, you're supposed to have these things. And I said, again, well, where's the proof that I have to have these things? So off he toddled, and he went and spoke to his desk sergeant for about 20 minutes. And then he comes back and he says to me, right, we're going to arrest you for theft. And I said, well, that's interesting. What have I stolen? And he said, this vehicle. And I said, okay. I said, how are you going to prove that? And he said, well, how are you going to prove it's yours? And then I started to go down the track of well, aren't I innocent till proven guilty? Well, apparently not, because guess what? I went to jail. So I was arrested for theft, right? But I think that's really interesting, because I'm there on the roadside telling him, I don't have a license, I don't have tax, I don't have MOT, I don't have plates, right? But he didn't arrest me for that. Isn't that really strange, don't you think? I think that's pretty interesting. So anyway, we go to the police station, and I like to have a bit of fun, as we all do, because you've got to have a sense of humor, right, with these things. So I asked him, because he wasn't going to put down the fact that I had no tax on my vehicle. So I said to the desk sergeant, I said, look, you haven't put the tax down. His eyes bulged. He's like, aren't you in enough trouble? I'm like, no, I think I want to have this down so that we can get this through a court and see what happens. And he said to me, he said, I'm not going to put that charge down. He said, because it's a civil matter. He said, and what the DVA will do is they will come and they will approach you and they will demand the tax and you'll have to pay it. And I said, okay, we'll see. But you know what? In all the time, ever since that day, they've never chased me for the tax. And I reckon I put all the money on in my back pocket right now. The fact they couldn't chase me for the tax is the same reason why HMRC hasn't demanded any tax from me. It's because I'm not registered, right? And again, I would say, if I'm transferring ownership, how come I was able to deregister? But the problem came, okay, so basically I was fingerprinted, and then once I was fingerprinted, because I've been foolish and naive and I didn't realize what that public persona was, I've been using it. I've been using it as identity. I've been getting driving licenses, I've been getting passports and all those sorts of things. And so basically what happened was they pinned me to that public persona, and then they charged that public persona. And then off to court we went, and that's when we started to really have fun. Because we went on for 2 years. 2 years. The charge was no license, no tax, no MOT, no plates. And I'm saying, yes, I don't have any of these things. And it still took 2 years. I thought that was really interesting. So anyway, so we go to court. I just wanted to show you this. This is the letter that the court sent me. Again, I've taken some of the details out just to protect myself. But notice, they're not writing to me. They're writing to the public persona. Because they can't limit my rights. They can only limit those rights. And what they're doing is they're making a presumption that I'm operating on their behalf at the time of the complaint. And again, the main reason why it took 2 years, apart from the fact we were putting judges on oath and they were running out the room, aside from that, the reason why it went on 2 years is because I kept asking for the evidence that I had an obligation. Well, do you know what? I did actually get given that evidence. Okay, because what happened was I went to the last one, and Brian and Mike all came along, and I stood at the door, and I asked the judge, and I said, look, hey, I'm going to come in, I'm going to play a game, I don't mind, it's 2 years, let's just get this over and done with, but I want all of my inalienable rights protected in that courtroom. And what did he do? Instead of saying, come inside, you silly little boy, and let's go and sort this matter out, what he said, leave my courtroom. So I did. So I left the courtroom, and he proceeded in my absence. And of course, there was no one there to make any sort of defense or any sort of opposition. Yeah, another interesting thing was while I'm in the lobby, waiting for my own case to finish, right, which is a bit strange, and the two police officers, or I should say constables, but I think in many ways they're becoming officials, aren't they? They come into the lobby, and I'm quite friendly with them, and I'm shaking their hands, and I'm saying blah blah blah. Hey, isn't it strange that I'm not in the courtroom? I'm supposed to be defending myself. Oh yeah, it is strange. And they go in there and they make their account, their witness account of what happened that night. And then what happened is they came out and arrested me. And they arrested me for not attending my own court case. I mean, you're just like, wow, okay. But you guys just spoke to me in the lobby, right? Oh, yeah, but the judge says, oh, really? But I thought you guys... No, it's the judge. Oh, okay. So I went off to jail. And then I came back, and then they produced my driving license. Now, that's the first time in 2 years, in a 2-year case, they'd managed to produce my driving license. And as soon as they did that, case was slammed. And that's because I had a contract, and I had not abided by it. I don't have a license anymore, by the way, and I don't intend to get one. So this is what's happening, right? Remember this is what I showed earlier, the private and public side. Okay, well, what's happening is that, right? And as we all know, the government, I'm sure everyone here knows, right, the government's a corporation. Everyone knows that, right? Yeah, cool. And if you don't know, Dun & Bradstreet, you can get on there, or the plethora of, websites that are talking about it now. Okay, the government is a corporation. The courts are registered corporations. It's all registered and corporate. And what's happening is, most importantly, is that they're incorporating our rights, okay? And if that happens, if we allow this to continue, and we're doing it out of, I'm not accusing anyone here, but as a species, as a whole, we're doing it out of selfishness because we want this. Oh, I really need this app. Oh, I really need this product. Oh, I really need this surface. I can't be asked to read the terms and conditions. I can't be asked to care that I'm signing a contract. I just want what I want. And that's a big problem in our society, is sometimes you just got to do what's difficult and not get that app or sign up to Facebook or whatever, because these corporations, they're slowly taking over. We're seeing it in the whole raft of government. Public servants, G4, take example, like police people who work in the police are moving over to G4. People who are working in the NHS are moving over to other corporations. We've got public property, which is being sold off. Our roads are going, our buildings are going. Our registered businesses are being taken over. And all of this is happening through contract, through agreement. Okay? And what we need to do is the ultimate form of showing discontent, deregistration, and actually physically removing consent. For me, it's not enough to say, I don't consent. Okay? You have to actually take physical action to make sure that contract, that agreement that we've agreed to is nullified. Okay? That's how we remove consent. So I just wanted to leave you with a few, how much time have we got, Mike? 5, brilliant, perfect. So I'm just going to have three quotes, okay, from some very interesting people. The first one was Jim Hightower. I don't know if everyone knows him, but he's basically an activist in America. Okay, and he wrote, "The corporations do not have to lobby the governments anymore. They are the government." Okay, how many people would agree with that? Yeah, I would agree with that, right? So here's a man that probably knows quite a few dark things, right? Woodrow Wilson. He said, "There was a time when corporations played a minor part in our business affairs, but now they play the chief part. And most men are the servants of corporations." And that really is, for me, that really sums up where we're going. Because we're, through certain drives, mostly economic, we're being forced to sign up to these corporations. We're being forced to give jurisdiction over to them. When people take a job now, it's just accepted that you just sign the contract. You don't see people going through it going, do you know what? I don't want to work for like zero pence an hour. I don't want 0 contract hours. I don't want this. Here's my terms and conditions, and this is how good I am at my job. Do you want that? We don't do that, because at the moment we're being pushed into low-skilled jobs, which is where a vast number of people are going. And so because there's more people for the jobs that are required, corporations know that they can set pretty much anything and people will consent to it. So Abraham Lincoln. I don't know why I picked all American quotes. I think I was just picking the quotes, but it just so happened that they're American. But then, the fact we're talking about corporations and government, I think America pretty much is leading the way in that, or certainly publicly. In Britain, things happen a little bit more quietly and behind closed doors. So he said, no man, and I've added corporation, is good enough to govern another man without the other's consent. And I would say, yeah, that's really true, and that's really important, but what we have to do is make sure we read the small print, because it's in the small print that our rights are being taken away, okay? It's not the problem. Registration is not the problem. Having driver licenses isn't necessarily the problem. It's the fact that these instruments, okay, we're signing willy-nilly, and these instruments are what's taking our rights away. They're not being stolen, we're giving them away, okay? Now, we can't lose them forever because they're birthrights, they're inalienable, right? We can't lose them forever, but we can hang them up and we can forget about them. And that's going to be a really dark world if that happens, because our children's children aren't even going to know that they had inalienable rights, because if we lose this constitution, right, and I'm not saying this is the be-all and end-all, I'm not saying that, but at the moment it serves as a great contract between us and the state, which makes them, they have to follow these rules, and when you present these in court, you know, or even, in fact, even to a body, I was challenging council tax, it was only a 500 quid bill. And I was going backwards and forwards, all these different, I started off with the Freeman stuff, and then it wasn't really working, and then I met John and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, okay, so hang on a minute, you want to charge me 500 quid, where's that money going? Oh, we can't tell you. Well, I'll tell you what, I reckon it's going to go to the EU, and if it's going to go to the EU, well, aren't you giving power to a foreign power, and doesn't it say that in the Bill of Rights? And I said to him, I think we should go to court and debate that. You know what happened? I got a letter back saying, don't worry about the bill, it's all gone. And that's the point. And that's really the point. If you take nothing away from my talk, right, or nothing away from today, really, in all truth, it's that the Constitution is a contract. It's an agreement, right? And it's about time we make sure that the Queen, the public servant, and the government, Her Majesty's government, not the Queen, Her Majesty, our government, right, which is under contract by our power, we should make sure that they do exactly what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to protect your spiritual, civil, and property rights. And if they're not, you have a contract with them, and you can take it to them and say, do your job, because that's actually an agreement, and it's incredibly powerful. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malcolm, and thank you, Malcolm, for condensing that, that brilliant talk. Who else is loving the step-by-step illustrations of practical ways to take our power back? I think it's been brilliant.